All right, here we go. Back again. Kyle, what's going on this week, bud? How you doing?
Good,
Are,
man.
are
How you
you
doing?
are you are you with me? I know you've been lost in a trance with these, the new Apple.
No,
Uh, what are they called? The
the
goggles.
the Vision, yeah, the Vision Pros. I'm actually this isn't actually me. This is an AI version of myself. This is my avatar. So, and you'd never know.
You're off somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm actually answering this call from a beach, and I've just pretended to be in an office this whole time.
Hopefully, you built this scalable, and I can get like 10 more of you.
Yeah, if you see my hands doing this, I'm interacting with the digital world. So,
That was
um,
actually perfect because your camera started looking like shit while you did it, so it really made it believable.
it's a Gen 1 version. All right,
Okay,
got to
good.
work out the bugs.
Good. All right. So, but despite having a new toy to play with, you actually have been working and up to stuff from what I can tell. I know you've been actually doing a lot of uh, dev stuff on our AWS environment over the last week or two.
Yeah, yeah, and we've got a couple of initiatives internally, in kind of back end back end operations, and then updating those things. So it's just kind of the ripple effect, right? As we make some business decisions, and then how do we enable that and support it with our technology or digital environment. So updating some of our databases, and then pulling additional levels of reporting. Um, as certain parts of our business have taken off, we've been doing a lot more pro serve. We start adding additional pieces there to support that line of business, and including reporting, business intelligence, and those things. So it requires some dev work to put it all together.
Cool stuff. I know. If you had your way, you'd probably spend all your time doing that. But then I pull you back and make you do other things too. So,
Yeah.
um, good stuff there. On kind of the client facing end of things, things have been going pretty well over the last couple of weeks. We're got our cyber practice lead, Adrian, who's he's been Josh. I don't know if he's guested on this specifically with Kyle and I, but obviously he's hosted some of our RaaP episodes and like out there in the space. But he's been out delivering with a pretty large publicly traded company over the last few weeks. Really kind of delivering in maybe what traditionally some people would have called like a virtual CISO type role, or a fractional CISO type role. But we're really, you know, distinctly showing up differently than that, in that he's actually on site and doing work. I mean, his sleeves rolled up with the team, not just saying, hey, here's what you kind of need to do, but obviously it started that way, but then now he's out there with them and they're actually executing. I mean, I was checking in with him yesterday afternoon after he was done for the day. And I mean, they're really, really executing really quickly on a lot of the short term initiatives and things that they needed to do to close some gaps. And so it's really an impactful engagement. And like, you know, once he's done with that, I'm going to be having conversations with him about kind of this distinction on what he's doing versus the kind of traditional virtual CISO role, which my sense in the marketplace is like, um, that's not quite landing as strongly as it has historically with, um, especially like technology executives. Like I think about a lot of CIOs I talk to, like, and this isn't true for all. I'm sure there's a space for it, but a lot of them aren't that keen to like go get a vCISO role, right? Because
Yeah. Why? I guess, yeah. Expand on that. Why is that, or what are you hearing?
I really need to chat with Adrian about it a little bit more and probably do some customer interviews on it, like to really get underneath it and figure out what the root cause is. But it seems to kind of just be this distinction between like, hey, like I don't really need to be told by somebody else all the stuff I have to do, right? Like kind of understand that. Like, most clients we're talking to at the size we're talking to, like they have a decent understanding for the things that need to be accomplished. What they don't necessarily have a either bandwidth for or just management time is the actual organization of the work to start, knocking down targets, and organizing them in a way that is actually forwarding for the business. So it seems like that's a lot of what Adrian's been executing on this specific engagement. We're getting really really great feedback, from the CIO there. And I'm excited to recap with him afterwards.
Yeah,
Josh is
I
dropping
heard
in the
it.
chat over here. One other thing, it is because good point, Josh. It is because everyone's saying they're a vCISO these days. I feel like any
Yeah,
any cybersecurity company that's out there is like, oh, we do this, this, and this. Also, we're vCISO.
well, it's kind of a buzzword that took off, but now is kind of having some pullback.
Yeah,
Uh, Now that's interesting. I'd heard, and it was unrelated, but I heard a saying that I think somewhat applies, and I'm gonna butcher it, but it was like getting charged a bunch of money to tell you what time it is by telling you to look at your watch, right?
oh, yeah. Yeah,
Something
yeah, that's the traditional take on consultants, right?
something
Let me
something
let me
similar.
let me interview you about what time it is, and then I'll put it on a fancy PowerPoint and tell you
Yeah,
what
tell
time
you
it
to
is.
look at your watch.
Yeah,
Yeah, I guess I think we see that a lot of clients like needing help with actually like picking up, for lack of a better term, picking up a shovel and getting to work,
yeah,
and actually helping knock down some of these targets and move the organization forward in a meaningful way. So,
for sure. Yeah, so that's been really good. Otherwise we're doing our thing out here, man. Staying busy. I know a lot of our industry this week was at a conference out in Vegas. I felt a little bit like I was missing out. Like definitely a lot of you know either my peers or partners, like that type of stuff, are out there. Um, but man, when I evaluate, it's just like my clients aren't there. Like I'm sure it's fun. And there's probably some stuff to be learned. But it's ultimately decided to sit out this year. So um, it's been decent to be able to focus in on clients and with the team instead of the inundation from vendors in the space that typically happens since they've all been busy this week. So
yeah,
um, yeah, been a good week.
good.
All right, man. I think we'll be a little short on the intro and kind of what's up and what's top of mind with us this week. We're going to get into an education session. So I guess we'll take a break here, come back, and knock that out. Josh, hit the soundboard. Cue the school bell. Ring, ring, ring.
School is now in session.
Production quality can only go up from here. All right, welcome to the section where one Kyle teaches another Kyle something that maybe they didn't know. This week, what we're going to be talking about is the champion challenger model as applied to vendor services. So, Kyle, I was chatting with you about it before. I threw that term out. You didn't know it. So I think we may be onto something here,
Yep.
which, for the people out there, I generally have to search pretty far and wide to find something that Kyle doesn't know something about. So I'm excited to do this one. And I guess I'll give you some context for why I've been researching it deeply lately. I've got a client specifically, although this applies to a couple of other clients as well, that is struggling with their BPO, so their business process outsourcer. Specifically, this is a contact center related BPO. So they've got somebody who's making fielding calls for them. This one's is primarily doing outbound, although I've got other ones that this applies to. They're receiving inbound calls. And essentially what's happening is they're in like a sole source situation, right? They've got one BPO, they've had them for a while, and performance isn't really where they want it to be. But like it's a really key part of their business operations. I mean, they're fielding a lot of calls. Again, performance isn't really where they want it to be. The costs have creeped up over time, and they're really kind of exposed, right? I mean, the vendor has a lot of leverage in this situation because they're really relying on them to run a large part of their business. And so they're exposed, which is what allows the cost to creep up while the service declines. And so one of the kind of traditional, I would guess I would say largely this function would live within procurement, as far as kind of developing the strategy and executing on the strategy, and it comes out of vendor management, but it's called the champion challenger model. And essentially what it is you have kind of your best in class, right? Your champion, whoever your key vendor is in that space, and a challenger that you introduce, right? And so the optimal balance of whether it's call flow, or maybe it's even service tickets if you apply it to an MSP, or other things, like is gonna vary. Maybe it's 80-20, maybe it's even 90-10. But you have some other vendor that is there and providing that service to really kind of introduce an accountability metric to the champion that's there. The other thing that it does is it gives you as the buyer, as the procurer of the services, it gives you some leverage that otherwise you don't have when you're really, really reliant on this vendor. Um, so that's kind of the context for why I'm researching it deeply. Is we're working on executing this strategy with one of our clients right now with a BPO, so that they can increase their leverage, drive costs down, and also just give them a viable path for the future in case things don't improve. Right? Like, you don't really want to have to like allow it to reach this point where it's so bad that you've just got to rip it all out and start from scratch. You would much rather use this methodology, this kind of champion challenger methodology, over time to, if that challenger is actually exceeding performance of the champion, you can gradually grow the challenger while decreasing the champion, as far as the percentage of their business. And so we're working to implement that in the BPO. But there are some other spaces, like as I was reflecting on it and thinking about it, that I think are a fit for it. And so, I mentioned BPOs. I think I just mentioned it in passing, but other managed services, IT managed services, this could be a space for. There are some kind of considerations when you're doing that, around like, is it going to take way more to administer this or manage this? Because ideally, there's benefits and cost, just like any situation, right? And so
Yeah.
for it, you can increase your leverage, you can potentially lower your cost to that vendor, but introducing a new vendor and managing this whole strategy obviously comes with some overhead costs and some focus and time from your team from a vendor management function perspective. But there is the space for that in managed services, potentially like something in a help desk, right? Especially if you own your own service ticket. Like let's say you own your own snow environment, and you can route some of these service tickets differently. That would be a space to do it. If your help desk is an outsourced help desk and you're using their tools, it makes it a lot harder to do that, right? So something to think
Yeah.
about when you think about how you structure your managed services. But potentially help desk could be there, right? Because like what you really want is you want objective measures. Like, subjectivity matters some in this, but you want to be really objective in a champion challenger model, because you're going to have your key KPIs that you've baselined with your champion, and that you're going to want the challenger to exceed those. All right. And so you need things like SLAs or some sort of KPIs that are important in the space. Like, that's kind of a prerequisite for the strategy. So some managed services are a fit there. The other space, and I think our section, maybe we were talking about this a week or two ago, I don't remember when it was, but kind of how things have changed in network, where traditionally, like especially when you had an MPLS network, you kind of had one network provider, maybe you had two, but they were getting the whole network. Now with network aggregation, if you have SD-WAN and you just have circuits underneath, you could potentially even have multiple aggregators in a champion challenger model, where you're looking at price, because commoditized product. You're looking at speed to delivery. You're looking at mean time to repair, like those sort of things. And this would work in a kind of high turnover environment or a lot of locations. Could work there. Could also potentially work, and I imagine you'll have something to say about this, but could also potentially work in a cloud environment, right? People with a multi-cloud strategy, where you're going to have some things that are a fit in one versus the other, but you end up there's a kind of buzzword out there, around vendor lock-in or cloud lock-in, and what costs are happening there. If your organization is really all in on one, you're just in an exposed space, right? And so this champion challenger model is a way to avoid that. I'm sure there's some other spaces where it would apply, but those are some of the ones I've been thinking about that are applicable to us. There are some spaces where it doesn't, right? And that's where, things where when you start to look like voice, right, would be a challenge to do this model, because you typically want all of your users or all of your locations on the same voice platform. Contact center would be similar.
Yeah.
It can be. There's a different, like if you go Google champion challenger, you will find a way where it talks about that in contact center, but it's typically talking about configuration of your call flows in a champion challenger. It's more like an A/B testing for it
Yeah.
versus a vendor management piece. Um, but I guess just trying to kind of bring it home a little bit on here and talk about best practices, and then I'll try to answer any questions you've got. The first one, and I hit on it, but really baselining your champion, baselining your KPIs and your SLAs around them and your cost, so that you have a metric that your challenger is working to exceed. The other one is like you really want to use this strategy very intentionally with vendors that you have kind of high engagement with, right? These aren't your commoditized vendors that you're talking to once a year. These are ones where they're very, very key to your business operations, because to get the best out of it, you're going to need to manage this strategy effectively. The next, and like some procurement professionals may disagree with me on this, but mine would be inform both of them of the strategy that you're using, of the measures that they're up against, why you're using it, and what you're really hoping to improve long term. You may not want to talk about the leverage piece quite as much, but what metrics are you really looking for them to perform on, and where have they fallen short in a way that led you to doing this strategy. Then the next is having likely a monthly, a minimum of a quarterly cadence where you're reviewing their performance against baseline, talking to them about how that's going to impact your decisions moving forward. Are you looking to award more business to the challenger because of performance, right? Like again, this is something where you really want to be engaged with these vendors on a deep basis, and being pretty transparent about not only what you want, but the consequences of, or the repercussions of their delivery. And I guess the kind of implication there, right, is like that's probably not a quarterly with an account executive. That's probably a quarterly with someone in that organization that actually has some weight to make decisions, and probably not just someone on the sales side. It's probably someone in service delivery, that actually has some impact and can take that feedback. That's kind of some of the best practices around it. I guess the other ones are, when you have key vendors, this is a strategy you can look at. If you're on a 3-year renewal with them, you really want to be bringing this in a year, minimum before that renewal, right? This isn't something you want to bring in at renewal time. It needs time to perform. And so, it's a strategy that takes some focus, takes some effort, and takes some intention, but can really lead to not only like performance improvements, but both cost savings potentially, and definitely cost avoidance, right? Because left unchecked, many vendors, especially in these spaces, without a challenger, they're raising their prices, every opportunity they have. A challenger, what that really brings in is the opportunity for you to have some leverage and avoid that. So, what questions you have?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think I would want to double touch on some of the pro cons, right? Because I imagine on the operation side or on the tech side, like those people may agree and disagree with some of those points, right? Where, okay, so we get a little bit better or maybe a lot better pricing, but you introduce operational complexities
Yeah.
or technical complexities or both, right? Where now instead of getting synergies of, working with that vendor and having all of our business processes, integrated well, you end up having to like do double the amount of work for the same, what is really the same outcome of having that business process integrated. Now there's again the pros and cons, right? You've de-risked it as if that vendor was a market leader all of a sudden fast forward 5 years and they're slipping and they're not innovating and they're no longer a market leader, and you've built this entire business on them, you end up with that vendor lock-in that's kind of hard to break. But I can also see an environment where like this, and I think you touched on, like, this isn't a apply everywhere type strategy, right? There definitely a level of like, is this the right strategy for the right vendor, or right, specifically in our space, technology, but the right solution type thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a use intentionally sort of strategy, right? I mean, like, and there's definitely places where, are bad place to use it, right? Like I think about like a CRM, right? Like you can't really do that on a CRM platform because you need a source of truth for the business, right?
Yeah.
Productivity suite, right? Like you're not going to do this with Microsoft and Google, for instance. This is also one of the reasons that Microsoft is thought of the way that they're thought of by their clients, and like, uh, kind of people begrudgingly at times are like, I'm stuck with them. I can't go anywhere, right? Like you can't introduce any strategy like this with them. But in some places it can work. You do need to, have conversations with the technology team about what it would take to introduce another vendor. Now, my counter would be, if it takes a whole bunch to introduce another vendor, it's the leverage piece. It goes back to it, right? Like that's going to be there one way or the other, right? So you may want to start asking yourself some questions about like, okay, why are we so entwined with one? Is this something we really have to accept and just know as a risk? And we need to manage that vendor with a different strategy, a different engagement strategy.
Yeah, because I'd say Apple, right? Like if you're an Apple person, if you build around Apple product, this is more of a device type ecosystem, but like they want that, right? They've created where it's too easy not to. Like when you have a MacBook and then you have an iPhone and then you have an Apple Watch and you have an iPad, like you create this ecosystem where you and your data can follow you, and your preferences can follow you from device to device to device, right? And then you break that when you go out and you buy a PC. Um, you can't do that. So like there are now, again, like then you end up with vendor lock-in, and Apple can charge the prices that they charge, right? So um, there is the other side, but I think you would want, to your point, like I would go back to like with intentionality, like is this the right solution? And are the rewards going to outpace what additional the cost of complexity? Because there's a cost to that, right? Like even in what you're discussing of, well, you've got to manage it. Well, who's going to manage it, right? Like you need a competent, capable person to manage it. The time that they're going to put towards dedicating it, the architecture of your data, and where certain sources of truth live. Because even if you think about, whether it's a help desk or something like that, if you were running that in two spaces, but where's your knowledge base, right? And then how, if they own those knowledge bases, well, now like when you make one update to a policy, you've got to update it in two places, versus maybe you pull that back and they're doing dips into your knowledge base where, okay, for this instance, these are the steps that you follow. The help desk is plugged into it. But all of those are considerations in how you put this together from both an operations perspective, and then how do you do it from a technology perspective.
Yeah.
And what are the gains versus what are the risks.
I mean, look, my opinion would be at a minimum going through that thought exercise anyways, because the worst time to do it is under duress. It's when that vendor is performing at a place that is unsustainable, or they've reached a price point that's unsustainable for you. Right. And so like going through that exercise, even if it's only a thought exercise, is pretty important from a risk management perspective.
I 1,000% agree. I think you don't want to blindly choose vendor lock-in.
Yeah.
Or end up there by mistake. Like if you're in one of those or the other, it should be because you intentionally weighed the pros and cons and made that conscious decision of, hey, you know what, in this solution, we are going to take a unified approach with a vendor and their ecosystem. And we acknowledge that there's a lot of pros and there's a lot of cons to that. And this solution, we've evaluated the marketplace and how it affects our business. We've decided to create more of a more than one solution in that and create this challenger ecosystem. Because there is, I mean, you introduce that natural, a little bit of friction, keeps that champion on their toes. I can see, and it also gives them something to try to pursue. There's additional business out there for them to win if they can perform.
Yep. Absolutely. So, I mean, it's a strategy we believe in very targeted places, right? And so,
yeah.
Working on it, with a BPO client right now, and we'll update in a couple months. But cool. That is the education session today. Hopefully, you learned something, and I look forward to whatever it is you're going to teach me next week.